Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Unique Peace. I am Janice. I am a Reiki Master Teacher and medium here on Long Island, and I'm so excited about today's guest, Andy Campbell. Andy Campbell is a resilient survivor of a lot of trauma and currently going through this chemotherapy and other things that help you get through stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He is also the author of Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, 15 breakthrough beliefs, core beliefs to help you get through any of your toughest challenges. And he's going to touch on those with us this morning. So everybody, welcome Andy Campbell. Morning.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, you reached out to me, and I was so grateful that you reached out to me. So let's start off with what called you to Unique Peace?
Well, I think the name, actually, to begin with, was when we're going through difficult times, and we've had setbacks, and it can be any kind of setback. Doesn't have to be what people think is a major setback. Doesn't have to be pancreatic cancer. It could be, the loss of a job, or just the loss of a friendship, or a challenge someplace. I think finding peace is an honorable objective. It is an honorable goal to find peace, both for yourself and for those who love you and know you, and for people that you don't know, that you just meet in the store or on the street. Because then what you begin to share with people, inadvertently, unintentionally, your energy is shared with people. I've read it's 6 feet, something like that. But you can certainly feel it in a room. You know people that when they walk in, the room just calms down. And you know people that when they walk in the room becomes more anxiety filled. And
Yes.
I think the idea of speaking to you about that, not that I've found peace every day, but in the pursuit of it, I just think it's something that helps us get through these really difficult times. You can find peace in the difficulty, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, that's a big challenge. You got to acknowledge where you are. You're like, oh, wait, okay, take a step back. And like you said, reading a room and noticing whose energy in, like, did the room shift when that person walked in, or did I shift? And owning your own energy first before saying, okay, it was a shift when this person came in or left or what have you. Because you got to check in first. Could be you. And that's a hard lesson for all of us to accept.
I know my wife walks into a room and an energy of like optimism shows up generally, like she just walks in, and people kind of gravitate toward her. The physician that was my acupuncturist through most of my cancer journey was I asked him one time, and there was a lot of stories behind this, but I said, how do you come to terms with it? He's a big believer in the combination of Eastern and Western medicine. And so when he retired from practice, he became a board certified acupuncturist and has, travels. And anyway, and he talks about being a Christian and a Buddhist. And I said, how do you reconcile those? I said, well, how do you label yourself? He said, oh, I'm a Christian Buddhist. And I said, that's interesting. But it was interesting to me because every single time I speak to him, I become peaceful. Every time, without fail. He walks into a room and you become peaceful. And my youngest daughter sees him also for acupuncture, and my oldest daughter knows him. She's a physician and knows him, and everybody says the same thing about him. And to me, that's a goal. I know people don't feel that way when I walk into a room all the time, but it's a goal to have that. So yeah, he just walks in and the whole room just becomes peaceful. I would like to achieve that one day.
And that's always a nice goal to have. I mean, I would like to achieve that every time I walk into a room myself. And I know that sometimes my energy could be different any hour of the day, actually, depending on when and where. So kind of bring us on your journey from the beginning to now. You have this book, you have this inspiring book, you have this inspiring story. Kind of like walk us through your journey to now.
I was born into a rather poor family. And you may judge from my accent and think, wow, he was probably born in the Bronx, but I wasn't. I was born in South Alabama. And to a very poor, into a poor family. Both my parents came from very poor families, but they were determined to not stay in poverty, and through a series of events worked themselves out of that. But what that required was that they worked constantly. So I basically grew up alone, which, there's trade-offs for everything. We're no longer in the same. The family has been certainly moved forward by their actions, but, then you leave yourself open to some challenges. One of those was I was groomed into what one would call sexual abuse. I mean, it was child sexual abuse. And I was, which kind of really set back my personality and my self-esteem, all those things that you don't really understand at the time. You're broken in I think, a very different way. And that led to living a childhood of a lot of bullying. I was much smaller. I was small at that time for my age. And then somehow I just grew later in life. But I was small then. And then I watched my mother go through a grueling struggle with cancer for 11 years, ups and downs. I saw 3 of her sisters die from breast cancer. Eventually, she succumbed to breast cancer. My father and I, after my mother was gone, we became estranged, became married, had 4 children, and along the way, ended up with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I was 53 when that was diagnosed. Prognosis was maybe 6 months or so, something like that. Here 7 years later. This August will be 7 years since that diagnosis.
Amazing.
I've been blessed to, have really good physicians around me. Some doctors that weren't so good, but a couple of really good physicians that guided me. And then about 4 years ago this June, I found my son's body after he had taken my youngest son's body after he had taken his own life. So that's kind of the highlights, I guess you'd say, or lowlights of the journey. There was a lot of other things in between. When I was 12 years old, a guy tried to kill me by beating my skull in. And so I ended up with a lot of surgeries and dealing with those things. So I guess the question is, you go through those things, and I like being alive. I enjoy being alive in spite of, or despite all of those things. And so how does one find some peace? How do you stay alive long enough to find peace? And that was really kind of the story I wrote down, and the 15 core beliefs that I ended up along the way just writing down these phrases. I tend to see words in pictures. I don't really think in words. I think in pictures. And so I needed words that would represent a picture to me. And so kind of cliches, like a meta phrase. And so I started writing down these phrases every now and then. And I would collect 5, and then I collected 10, and then I got to 15 and decided at 15 anything else I came up with needed to fit under one of those 15. So that's kind of the story of how I ended up here.
And incredible story of survival and endurance. So yes, thank you, live stream of consciousness, Michael. And that, I mean, we've all in some ways survived trauma. Yours is more tumultuous than others. And in that story of survival, which is an incredible story of survival, because here you are, pancreatic cancer, especially stage 4, that's not a long prognosis ever. And here you are 7 years later. And that's amazing. And what do you think in addition to the 15 core beliefs, Is there anything else you feel that contributed to that? I know that we were talking in the background of how you have a wonderful doctor who understands both the Eastern and Western. Do you think that helped
Yeah.
a lot?
Oh, yeah. I have two physicians. One, you know, life has a way, the universe has a way, the creator has a way of moving the universe in your favor, and sometimes it's so far in advance you don't even know it, right? My wife, we went to, we had just moved to this town, which is now about 30 years ago, and we needed a family physician, and she couldn't pronounce one of the doctor's names well, so she said, no, I'm going with this other one. Both of those turned out to be great physicians. So I guess I've had really four. I've met a lot of doctors in my life, but I've had four physicians. Two of them were at this original family practice, and when they retired, the physician that took over is now my current family physician. Two of those are very much into the Eastern and Western mix of medicine, and I didn't know it about my current physician until he told me that I really needed to read this book, Autobiography of a Yogi. That he reads it constantly. He goes back to it. He's read it 10 or 12 times, which kind of struck me as odd because he's extremely logical. But when I was diagnosed, I think one of the things I did when I was diagnosed, it was so overwhelming, Janice. Like I didn't want to die. I broke down like a baby and cried in his office, like I was just, melted because I didn't want to leave my wife. I didn't want to leave my children. I certainly didn't want to die a painful death like pancreatic. I'd seen people, my mother died from breast cancer, and some people have a will to live, and it's like they just won't die. My mother was like that, and she just had a will to live, which meant that it was a little bit more difficult in her last days. And so I thought, wow, if I'm like that, I do not want to die like that. And so one of the first things my physician told me was, and I think one thing I would share with people is, I'm not a big fan of the word like you're battling something, like a battling cancer. I actually made the decision that the only thing I could do was what my physicians told me to do. And so what I had control over was my attitude, was my approach to it. I had no control over, what therapies were available. I had no control over whether the therapies would work. I had no control over which physicians or doctors I might come in contact with. I had no control over anything. And so I think one of the things that helped him was I kind of gave up control of all the stuff I couldn't control.
That surrender
And
moment.
yeah, the one thing that came to me was, you will be presented with options and you need to be open to them. And my general physician came to me and he said, Andy, I think you have a shot. He said, I think you've got this genetic mutation that your mother had. And now there's some evidence that these new treatments work better when you have this mutation. And so don't go take your last vacation. Don't quit your job. I don't think this is over yet. And he said, always remember, I think at that time, it's like, it's much better now, but 7 years ago, it was 1% made it 5 years and 3% of people lived 3 years.
Okay.
And he said, but Andy, statistically, every individual has a 50-50 shot. So don't look at the population. Just remember that you have a 50-50 chance. You either will make it or you won't make it. So let's just focus on how you make it. And I think that was the one thing that I really think at that moment, I kind of found some peace in it, actually. Like I remember the moment that I was, and not to say that there weren't tumultuous moments, really challenging moments where I didn't have peace along the way. But in that moment, I kind of felt like I was unburdened. I was unburdened by all that I could not control. And maybe that's part of finding peace, is to become unburdened by that which you cannot control. And so I think that's my answer. That's what I would say to folks, like find peace in those difficult moments by unburdening yourself from all the things you really, really have no control over.
I agree, and I love that. And it's hard to remember, especially in the moment, but if you can do it, you get through it, you are the most peaceful person in the situation.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to not remember that right in the moment, like that's a goal, but you can recenter yourself. You can get back to that pretty quickly, right? And
Yeah.
you just have to kind of refocus your mind on that. And I think there is a constant evaluation of how much of this do I have control over.
So, how does that define your? How does that help define your personal definition of peace? What would your personal definition be?
It's one of those things I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I feel it. And I think that is, I guess what I described was the way I've come to find that place. But I've also been able to find that place. Peace is when my mind is uncluttered and actually nothing else kind of matters. There's just that, those few moments. I find that a lot. I do acupuncture regularly. And I'm kind of like Pavlov's dog now. I've done it so long that whenever the acupuncturist starts to put the needles in, like the first needle, I just kind of I go into this like meditative state. And forever, how long that lasts, my mind just kind of goes black, and my body just relaxes and the tension goes away. And I think maybe that's how I define peace, is when there's not a lot of clutter in my mind.
And so, clearing out that clutter, I'm imagining, is one of the ways you find peace personally and bring that into your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, I think so. And the pursuit of that actually gives me some peace, because it gives me some hope that I'm going to get to that state of peace. So, finding ways I think you have to be active in searching for peace, right? I don't think peace just shows up. You have to have some level of discipline to meditate. You have to have some level of discipline just to schedule the appointment to go to the acupuncturist or go to the Reiki, the Reiki practitioner. You have to have I think you have to have a desire for peace. I do have a desire to live in that state where the outside world doesn't kind of get inside my aura.
Yeah.
Like it stays external to my aura. And I think that's what I find in those practices, that when I'm not in those practices, um, I think that's the outside world kind of penetrates that aura, my aura. And that's when things start getting unpeaceful.
Right. So, in addition to discipline, we're being reminded that intention is also helpful. So,
Yeah.
and talking about like the discipline, because it is hard to find that discipline, that practice, unless you're like in the military or in a very regimented field in life. So when you're talking about discipline in the pursuit of peace, why do you think you feel challenged in that? Why do you think it's not that easy? And I can understand that. I can totally understand the intention in pursuit of just peace requires a lot of discipline. So if you think you know why it's more of a challenge, or is it just something that you have to do every day and every day is different?
Yeah. I think, well, we're all different personality types, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I have found is that the practices work the way they work, but your life will have variables in it that will get in the way of, there's only so many hours in a day and something will be sacrificed. You will make choices on where your priorities are. And some days those priorities may be going to chemotherapy. Those priorities may be going to therapy and doing EMDR, which I don't find EMDR to be very, peaceful, but it
No,
leads to peace.
DNR is
So
intense.
in the moment, it's not peaceful, but it does lead to peace, or at least leads you to the opportunity to find some peace. And so I think one of the things that I've been working towards is becoming more disciplined in modifying the practices into the daily routine. And so it doesn't always, if you're traveling and you're on a plane, maybe you can take 5 or 10 minutes on the plane to close your eyes and work to find it. But it's, you're not going to just set aside travel for work. You have to do that. You're not, you have to maintain wherever you live, you have to maintain it. You have to, there's a lot of things. And then if you have a significant setback, mentally, emotionally, physically, there will be challenges in the routine that you may have created. And I think you have to be willing to allow the variables that have changed in your day. You have to be willing to allow yourself to modify those practices, right? So I was going to acupuncture every week. I don't have the time now to go every week because I'm actually not dead. So now I don't have the time to go every week, but I make sure that I go every other week, and I find a way to move things around. So I just modified it into what I could do. If I, we talked about heart math and the breathing exercises and those things. If you can't do 20 minutes, I should be doing 5. I can take 5 minutes during the day. Not to say that I'm disciplined enough to take 5 minutes, but I should be taking 5 minutes. So I think one can work around the reality of the difficulty. I think the world is just kind of designed in a way that it makes it difficult to find peace. It just does. Like, the world is just that way. And so, when I hear about something new, I have come to just accept that I may not be able to do it the way someone else does it, but I can take the principles of the practice that they have and apply those principles in some small way. And if I do enough of those together, I think that could lead to some moments of peace.
Yes, absolutely agree. Because sometimes all you have is, 5-10 minutes in between meetings, or 5-10 minutes before you got to catch that plane. And like you said, do it on the plane. That might actually be more helpful when traveling than
Yeah. So I had 4, my wife and I had 4 children. At one point we had 4, 5 and under. And so when I get on a plane, if there's a crying baby, many times I will get up and I'll change seats with whoever's sitting beside the crying baby, because I can actually meditate to a crying baby. Like, that doesn't bother me at all. So it makes the mother feel better, or the parents who are there feel better that they're, and maybe it kind of helps other people to take a breath and not hate on an infant, because an infant really doesn't understand why its ears hurt and why it's uncomfortable on a plane. But that actually affords me the opportunity in a really counterintuitive way on a plane to actually take a few minutes. And I feel like I'm helping somebody else. Maybe that's also a way to think of your pursuit of peace. You're actually helping other people. You're helping yourself. You're helping the people who love you, because now you're a little more peaceful. You're helping the people who know you. You're helping the people that you work with. And you're also helping people that you don't know, people that you just pass on the street, people that that encounter you and the energy that you bring with you when you show up. So I think I like to think I'm helping more than just myself by working toward being a more peaceful me. And that helps me a little more with discipline, right? When I start thinking about it being unfair to other people, if I show up at work in a meeting and I'm just not calm, I'm not peaceful, that doesn't seem to be very fair to everyone else. So that kind of reminds me I should do something about it.
And that leads very nicely to the next question. How do you help others find peace? In all of those ways, it's like being peaceful yourself helps others find peace. and taking
Yeah.
accountability for the energy you bring. And I love that. How else do you feel like you bring peace to others?
I think, well, one way is, so this may take just a moment to explain, but my mother taught me more about living in the 11 years that she was dying from cancer than any other person, life lesson, institution has ever taught me. And how you handle adversity, no matter how large the setback, how you approach that is can be a visible example, or yeah, a visible example to others that will help them be more peaceful when their adversity strikes, right? They will have seen someone who did it. They may ask you, and while what I've done won't work for everyone and won't work, the exact same way, they at least have an example that, I was I was abused sexually as a child, but he's made progress through, and that might give someone some peace that they could make progress through. He got a pretty bad cancer diagnosis. I've gotten a pretty bad cancer diagnosis. I would like to think that surviving and persevering through difficulties in some way helps others be more peaceful when their difficulties show up, because we all will encounter very difficult situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I share that thought process because anything that I've been through, I help others get through. It's like I've been there. You can get through
Yeah,
it too. I This
yeah,
is how I did it. It may not work for you, but this is how I did it. Here's a tool. Here's a here's something to work with.
something to work with and adapt it. Adopt the principle and adapt it to what works for you, right? But I think, I have I wrote something one time on my website that was, I think I used a werewolf as an example, but any of these monsters that show up, I think we were kind of lied to as children, because it was just one silver bullet that killed the monster.
Right.
I don't think that's reality. I think you have to have a lot of ammunition. You have to have a lot of arrows in your quiver, whichever, you know, armament metaphor you wish to use, right? You have to have a lot of those because these are difficult situations. So,
Yeah.
for me, it is, I still do guided imagery, Reiki, uh, acupuncture, and now I've started like this emotion code thing, and I do the, um, yeah, I think you have to approach life open to all the tools that the universe has available, and then you need to apply those tools in the way that you think works for you, and then you have to be open to changing what works for you. But I work to not give people advice, because I think, it's kind of presumptuous of me to think that the way I do it will work for you. But I do think sharing what has worked for you, um, can be very helpful, because it's been very helpful to me. Others sharing what has helped them has been very helpful to me. So I think that's another way that you can kind of spread that out.
And you have the 15 principles. We touched on these you go into detail in your book.
Right.
Now, of the 15, can you cherry pick a couple that you think are most helpful to, just everyday life? I'm sure they all
Um,
are, but
yeah, I think so. One that we've kind of uh, talked around a little bit today is equations are constant and variables are constantly changing. So, to me, there's a few ways that applies. One, you can share with me about Reiki, and I can think of, the process as being constant, but maybe the variables for me are different, and I have to adapt or, modify the way that principle works. Another one is that if you're going through adversity, give the universe time because the variables will change, right? So you may look at the summation of your life. If your life was an equation, you may look at the summation of that and say, well, that'll be the summation of my life. But tomorrow, variables will have changed and the summation of your life can be vastly different. And I think we have some influence over that. Like we can change some of the variables, the way we approach life, the way we approach people. Some of those things, other people will change. People will come, people will go, they will make decisions, it will influence things. And some, just the universe itself is constantly changing. And so I think one of the views of that particular core belief is do not judge the summation of your life by the equation that you see today. Many things will change, and that should give you some level of hope. And one of the things that can change, one of the variables that can change is your state of peace. What are you contributing to that, to your life summation? And so that's a big one for me because it applies to so many things. And I think it helps me remember to be more patient than I naturally am. You know, give things a chance to work out. Don't judge today. Don't just assume that you know what the outcome's going to be. You actually don't know the outcome. And so, yeah, equations are constant. Variables are constantly changing is a big one for me. Another one is always fall forward. Because if, and to me, that's kind of a mindset. When you have adversity, when you've missed your meditation for the day and you find that you are, anxious, you can just fall forward, get your mind into a positive place and go back to your practice and, begin the pursuit again. And if you're struck with adversity, sometimes adversity hits us very hard and it can knock us down and we think we can't stand back up again. So to me, what I tell people is the first thing we have to do when adversity hits is recenter our mind. Focus back toward the positive goal that we had in mind to begin with. So that's kind of the essence of fall forward is mentally fall back. Fall forward into the path that you were on, mentally get your mind back on the positive. And then you can worry about all the next steps. The core beliefs are really just, to me, they're the things that I made notes to myself about that I rely on between when adversity strikes and when I'm able to do more about it. It's the thing that kind of sustains me in that gray area.
And what you were saying, my mom used to break horses for a living. And it's that whole, when you get knocked off, stand up, dust off, and go forward. So I love that.
Yeah. And what did she, my guess is that at some point, or maybe many times, she was bucked and she fell. And the first thing she had to do was turn forward and get back and find the horse, right? Make sure the horse
absolutely
gets centered to where she was, face it. And so that's kind of the essence of that, would fall forward. And if you don't fall forward, turn around quickly. Get your mind straight, get your mind back, get your eyes back on the prize, as it were. And I think, we see all these little examples every day, but we don't pay attention to them. But like when you tell me the story about your mother breaking horses, to me, that's visually what I see as someone who gets thrown, might hurt, but she quickly has to get herself righted. And then she figures out what to do next. The first thing is get physically and mentally back forward.
Oh, yeah.
And then decide what to do next, right? I think some people get stuck because they're trying to figure out what to do next instead of getting themselves centered again.
You gotta get centered. And the breaking horses example is very key because that's a dangerous thing to do. It's just a dangerous thing to do. Like if you don't get back up real quick, get yourself centered and find the horse, you could get kicked, you could get trampled. There's a lot of dangerousness to that. But it is a good example because it's like you got to get back up. And it's like she used that with us a lot growing up. And she's like, if the horse bucked you off, you'd get back on. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm moving through whatever it is.
Right. But and that's another thing. Like one of the reasons I think that we should make these pursuits is because we will leave behind. We may not know we're choosing, but we are choosing what to leave the next generations, and maybe 3 or 4 generations into the future, because the people that are after us are going to, just like you do with your mother, like that stays with you, and you will pass that on to other people, and they will pass that on. And so I think that is in this pursuit of moments of peace, or possibly even a life of peace, or more peaceful than it is. I think that is one thing that I really work to remind myself. I'm actually choosing today what to leave future generations. It's not all about me in this moment. Now, I may do some things for me in this moment, meditate, breathing exercises, go to the acupuncturist. But what I'm really doing is I'm showing the people who are around me ways that they may end up taking, or that will be passed on. Persevering through, and the cancer treatments were very difficult. Um, they were very difficult, but persevering through. My mother taught me to persevere, and now I think I've taught my children to persevere. And I think you get to choose what you're going to leave behind. You actually do get to choose. You may think that life has been unfair, and it has been unfair. Life itself is unfair. There's nothing fair about life, so I don't have that expectation. That's one thing that I would say that kind of helps attain some peace, is that I don't have an illusion that life is fair. Now, I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's just more positive to face it and determine that life is not fair. I won't get sidetracked by focusing on the fact that it's unfair. It just is. I mean, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The rain just falls. It
And
does
then
what it
just
does.
falls. Yep.
So accept it and decide today what you want to leave future generations. And I think that helps guide, at least for me, it helps guide me in the smaller steps. If I'm anxious, or I'm disgruntled, I'm angry about something, I have become better at recognizing that I'm actually sharing that with my family. Like I'm actually sharing that. And so remembering that I'm choosing today what I will pass forward, or what I am passing forward, helps me come back from that a little faster, a little quicker. I still go there, but I just get back a little faster now.
That actually is a beautiful answer to the next question. And well, what's in your toolbox? And if you've got, you know, you have a coworker or one of your daughters or even your wife, and you can see that, like, that kind of inner storm, and they're sharing that energy, how quickly can you bring them back to center, or nicely say, hey, check your energy.
Yeah. Um, I think one of the things, I would say this is in all of our toolboxes. I'm guessing that you have listeners who, like me, don't always use that tool, but that tool is to not absorb their energy and not become part of their state of mind. And by not doing that, I do think that peaceful energy is more powerful than negative energy. I think positive energy is more powerful. And that if we can sit in that, in those really difficult moments, or in those interactions, a peer at work, an employee who's complaining, someone who reports to you, someone, that you report to, or that, your boss that you're having a problem with, or they're having a problem, and now it's rolling downhill to you. I think that the way we respond, and it's so difficult for me to not react. I mean, I'm just kind of being transparent, right? Like it's difficult not to react. Um, but I have found that if I don't react, and I respond with my more peaceful energy, my more calm energy, the situation will become more calm, generally speaking, right? Now, there's obviously those situations when someone's trying to rob you, and maybe that's not a place where you should, just
No.
hold peace. But,
Yeah.
I'm just speaking in your general day-to-day life.
Mhm.
I think one of the ways to help people become more peaceful is to exhibit peaceful behavior and responses. If that makes sense?
Oh no, it makes total sense. That's how I again, it depends on the situation. I try more often than not, especially now that I'm aware, to be that peaceful force.
Yeah,
Be
yeah,
that peaceful force.
and to me, it's kind of, if you work backwards from that, then that kind of leads to becoming a little more disciplined in your practices, because you can't be that peaceful one in the middle of chaos if you haven't practiced some level of that. And
Yeah.
I've rarely seen good decisions made when the decision maker was in a state of chaos or anxiety. That's just not where good decisions are made. I think the creator, universe, or higher power, whatever it is that someone believes in, I still think that thing speaks to us in a very quiet voice.
Yeah.
And I think chaos speaks in a really loud voice, like it's trying to take up all the oxygen in the room, right? And it's trying to just, so that if you're going to hear that voice, you kind of have to get yourself to a place where you can hear it, because it's quiet. It's a very soft voice, and that's the voice that speaks to you when you're dealing with other people. That kind of guides you in what to say next, how to help them become more peaceful, how to solve the challenge or the issue that's in front of you. And so I think it's almost a requirement that we work toward finding peaceful moments, so that we can hear that very soft voice give us the really good guidance that we need.
Agreed. Agreed. It is not a loud voice. It is not a
No,
loud voice.
I wish it was loud and it was so I could hear it when I'm in the middle of chaos, but it turns out it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. And it's always the hunches and the intuitive to do this, and you're like,
Yeah,
well, that makes no sense, but you do it anyway, and it's like, oh, okay. So it's that
yeah,
open mindedness of doing what you need to do, and being open to the different. I mean, you've lasted 7 years, and that's if you hadn't listened and been open minded, you may not have made it 3.
no.
So that's
And I'll give you a personal example of that. It actually goes to one of the core beliefs, which is, there are no hard decisions. There are only hard consequences. And I think the consequences, whenever we have a decision to make, and if there are, if we can't really imagine a difficult consequence, like, am I going to go to the Mexican restaurant, or am I going to go for pizza? Right? Like, not a lot of,
yeah.
generally speaking, not a lot of, consequences to that. But when you're, my, where I wrote that, where I wrote that phrase down was the day I decided I would do chemotherapy no more. Like, I was going to stop chemotherapy. And at that time, I knew of no other treatments. Uh, There weren't, as far as I knew, there were no other treatments. My oncologist didn't know of any other treatments. My family physician thought there were some things, but at that time, he thought chemotherapy was probably the thing I had to do. But it was killing me faster than it was killing the cancer. It had made
Yeah.
a great deal of progress against the tumors, but it was just killing me faster than it was. I had one chemo. It took me 3 days to do chemo. Every 3 weeks, I would do 3 days. They wanted me to do 2 weeks. I couldn't. After the first 6 rounds, I had to go to 3 weeks. But I would go into for chemotherapy. I would go in, and it would take 6 or 7 hours to get the chemotherapy and all the other drugs in. And then they would I had a port in my chest, and they would hook up the port to a pump. They would connect the pump, and I would carry the pump around for 42 hours. And it would slowly, like every 3 minutes, it would put a little chemotherapy, a little of the chemo drug in. And the reason they had to do that was, when they sent me home, they gave me a hazmat bag. And I said, well, what do I need a hazmat bag for? And they said, well, it's very unlikely. But if, the the IV that goes into the needle that goes into your port, if it were to come out, or if the tube were disconnect from the pump, and any of this drug spills out, immediately take it, put it inside this bag, and call the fire department. And I said, back up a second. I have to call a hazmat team for what you're putting in me. Like I'm walking around with
Oh
that.
my oh
They're
my
like, yeah,
goodness.
yeah, yeah. But if it falls out, if it comes out, you got to call the hazmat team. And I was like, man, this is
That's
tough.
dangerous. Yeah.
Yes, this that stuff. So I got to a point where it was killing me faster. And I don't remember how, it was probably during one of the acupuncture sessions because things get very quiet. My mind gets very quiet. And I heard this small voice tell me, you have to stop. And so I started talking to, like mentally. Uh,
Yep.
Hopefully I wasn't talking out loud, but mentally, I think I was having a conversation around, but yeah, but see, you're going to die. And that's when the louder voice was there, right? The louder voice was like, oh, you're going to die a horrible death and you're going to leave your wife and then your children are going to see you die this way. And like, you want to be. So, and then this smaller voice kept saying, you have to stop, just stop. And so I decided that I knew the decision to make, but the consequences were going to be hard. At least what I perceived the consequences to be. I couldn't see any good consequences, right? Like I couldn't
Right.
see, oh, well, if you stop and then you do some other things like fasting, long-term fasting in between, and you do all this stuff, in 4 months, your oldest daughter will find this treatment for you, will find this trial in this very specialized clinic at the University of Pennsylvania that only does treat. They're running 2 trials for pancreatic cancer patients that have your mutation, right? Like I couldn't see those, I couldn't see anything positive. All the consequences I could see were negative and they were
Right.
very loud. They will happen, right? Like in my head, it was like, these are going to happen. It's guaranteed it's going to happen. You're just giving up. It was playing on all the things that I didn't want. But I listened to that voice, the quiet
The
voice.
quiet voice.
And when I told my physician, I don't think my wife understood. She thought I was just like until the next thing, or she would have been more upset about it. But I decided to quit the chemotherapy. And I realized it wasn't the decision that was hard, it was the consequences. And what I'd done is I'd picked up the consequence, the perceived consequences, and I'd placed their difficulty on the decision. And now when somebody says, oh, I've got this hard decision to make, I always think to myself, no, you don't. You probably already know what to do. You're just trying to avoid the consequences. And you don't even know if those are the real consequences. You just, we tend to perceive the consequences, risk managing, like probably from ancient times, like watch out for that tiger. Don't, the tiger
Yeah.
will eat you. He will not be your friend. He will eat you. So don't do that. And so I think that taught me that you, you probably already know what to do. Listen to the small voice, the quiet voice, because it was out of that decision that led my physician to say, okay, if you're really going to quit, then I've heard about these other things at this clinic at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. And so I want you to try this fasting. So I did a 10-day water only fast. And that completely reset my immune system, completely reset my immune system. It's really where things started to turn around for me. And I tried one more chemotherapy after a 5-day fast, and it didn't. I was still very allergic to it. But what that time frame gave me was the time for my daughter to find this clinic at the University of Pennsylvania who I was like the perfect candidate. I had response to the chemotherapy. I needed to stop the chemotherapy. If the chemotherapy was still working, so this other drug might work. And like everything just kind of lined up. Uh, and it all lined up. Looking back on it, it was very tumultuous in the moment, right? Like I don't like those moments were very uncertain. Okay. 10-day water only fast for me is not, I'm like 6'1". At that time I was 250. Okay. I'm like 230 now. It was not a
That's
pleasant.
hard. Yeah, not pleasant.
I eat, as a matter of fact, I ate all the way through chemotherapy. Every now and then I would get nauseous. So I would, take the medicine they give me, but I didn't lose weight during chemotherapy. Like I was like this outlier that didn't lose weight. When I did chemotherapy, my wife would bring me either a Big Mac or a Chick-fil-A sandwich. Like I had to eat. That was the only thing that would keep my stomach from like
Yeah.
becoming nauseous or upset. And so I don't want to portray those 3 months as like, oh, it's just this decision and you listen to the quiet voice and then everything was
It's
peaceful.
not
It was
easy.
tumultuous, right? I mean, I was uncertain. I was still fearful. But looking back on it, I realized that by listening to that still small voice and not listening to the loud, chaotic, let me tell you all the bad things that are going to happen, that's how I ended up. And it was those treatments after my immune system kind of got that 10-day reset when I went into, and I had, and some of those treatments were really difficult. I almost died from, or I almost had a perforated intestine from some of the immunotherapy treatments I did.
Wow.
But looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I might not be here if I just, in that, when that voice was talking to me, if I had chosen the loud voice, I might not be here today, you know? So, and now I've wandered around in this conversation. I can't remember how I got here.
It's just listening to that small voice and that quiet voice usually brings us to peace. That's something in our toolbox that we need to remember, because the loud does want to win. It's that ego that's trying to protect us. Now, we need a little bit of protection, but what the ego thinks we need and what God, the universe, source knows we need, we got to find that in between. And that's that small voice, that
Yeah,
quiet voice.
I think, I know you see this as a master Reiki teacher, right? You see, like, these practices give us an opportunity to hear that voice, right?
Absolutely.
To feel that energy come in and to hear that. So to me, like, that's the purpose. Like, that's kind of the purpose. Like, why should you? My mother used to sit and read her Bible. That was her meditate. Like, she would read her Bible and pray. That was her thing. And but I think in whatever way we do that, I think that's why the universe, God, source, I think that's why it kind of says, hey, you need these practices, because that's so you can hear me.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's really powerful too.
It is. And when you tune in and you follow that small guide, that guidance, like you follow that. It wasn't easy. Nobody said it would always be easy. Half the time it's not easy. You want me to do what? And when you do it, things work out awesome.
Yeah. And you got to give it time to work out, because, usually the right thing is not the immediate thing.
Yeah.
It's the longer term thing is the right thing. And that will come with very difficult days. And, there's all these cliches, you climb the mountain, but you don't get to stand on the peak without struggling up the face, right?
Right.
But I think that's my son is my oldest son is I guess, like an overlander, a influencer on, has a large following on Instagram, TikTok, and he travels. And it's like after my youngest son's passing, he found peace in nature.
Yeah.
So he would travel, and he's been to basically every national park in New Zealand and different parts of Canada and, you know, Southern Alps. And but his whole story is that he goes there because when he's quote unquote out there, which is his merchandise line. So he made a merchandise line of out there because people kept saying, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm going out there. Because that's where he believes that we find that still small voice. Like, we don't find it in man-made structures very often, right? Because
Not
it's
very often.
concrete buildings and roads and cars. And so his thing is, if you can get out there, then you can get into what has been created naturally, not man-made, and that's where the still small voice is at. So his whole mission is to have people, when you're struggling to find peace, go to nature, go just sit. And I think that's pretty good advice, actually. It's pretty good advice as a way. But all these practices, what I've observed is that to me, the common thread is they help our minds
Quiet.
get to a place where our spirit is more in control than our mind. And that's where we get the message, where we get the energy, is at the spiritual level, not at the mental level.
100% agree. Thank you. And that's a very powerful reminder. And thank you. So,
Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate the time.
yep. I'm going to put Andy in the green room. I'll be right back, Andy. So, thank you everyone for joining Andy and I today. And if you want to learn more about Andy and his story and his book, please visit his website at askandycampbell.com. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Have a great day. Thank you